Hi, welcome back to the Story by Podcast. Thanks for stopping by. Today's episode, CarTrouble, was an early short that never quite seemed to find the right place. It wasn't straight comedy, wasn't horror, and wasn't some Tim Burton-esque blending of the two. It was just sort of slight and weird. By now, I'm sure you're totally sold on this story, and you can't wait to hear it, so why don't I save the rest of my comments till after you've heard CarTrouble.
"I think your car is possessed," Art said, matter-of-factly, as he slammed the hood closed. Ed Ford wasn't sure if he should take the mechanic seriously. "Just what exactly do you mean by that?" "You got gremlins," Art shrugged. "Nothing to be ashamed of. Happens in a lot of the foreign cars. Mostly the Japanese, but often enough in your German cars, too." Ed stared flabbergasted. "Gremlins? Is that your clever way of saying you can't fix it?" "Oh, no. I can fix it. Just may take some time. Those buggers are in there good and snug. It'll take work to get them out." Ed vehemently shook his head. "Forget it! You're not going to tell me it's little green creatures in my engine, and then gouge me for a fortune to exorcise them." Art looked shocked. "I would never charge you for an exorcism." "Darn right," snapped Ed. "That's church business. I just use cleansing spells." Ed snorted. "You'll do nothing of the kind. I'll have it towed to a respectable mechanic. I should never have relied on that auto club to find me a tow and a garage." He said the last as he wandered toward the nearby phone booth and began to flip through the yellow pages. Art Webster, owner, manager, and head mechanic of Art's Auto Repair and Occult Specialties, reasonable rates, gestured for his assistant Bob to push Ed's BMW out of the garage bay. Bob nodded, and with a shove, rolled the car into the gravel drive that surrounded the garage. Webster was a short, burly man covered with dark, shaggy hair. Wearing greasy overalls with a stained baseball cap mashed onto his head, he constantly chewed an unlit cigar, and definitely didn't look like anything but a mechanic. Bob Calder, by contrast, was rail-thin, nearly 7 feet tall, and so pale and blond that he could nearly pass for an albino. He moved slowly most of the time, and looked like his brain moved even slower. When Ed first arrived and saw the shop's sign, he thought that neither garage man looked as if he knew anything about the occult. At best, they looked like they could merely recite the tripe that could be gleaned from late-night horror films. Ed came storming back. "There's not a mechanic for miles that'll come out here at this time of night."
"Of course not, sir," Bob said. "It's nearly midnight, and everyone knows you can't go through Crimson Valley Road after dark, especially around midnight."
Ed was getting frustrated. This cryptic B-movie dialogue was irritating. "What are you talking about?" Bob continued.
"Crimson Valley Road. That stretch of road that you drove down on the way here."
Ed looked confused. "The road that passes the ghost town, Job's Luck," Art replied. "Why in blazes doesn't anyone travel it at night?" Ed asked. "Vampires," Art replied. Ed's eyes bugged. He looked back and forth between Art and Bob, expecting them to start laughing. "Just a bit of fun, Ed. Ha ha ha." "Look, I've had about enough fun. Vampires and gremlins, ha ha. Let's fiddle with the tourist, ha ha ha. Will you fix my bloody car or not?" Art shrugged. "If you'd like." Ed withdrew his wallet, extracted a credit card, and handed it to Art. "Take this. Fix whatever. I've got to be on the road and into the city by noon." Art gestured toward the car as he walked toward the garage's business office. "Push her back in, Bob. I'll go get the tools." With no visible effort, Bob shoved the BMW into the garage bay. He rolled the door down behind him, leaving Ed standing by himself in an island of fluorescent light. Suddenly, a large dark bird leapt from the garage roof and wheeled away into the darkness. In the distance, Ed heard something howl. He decided to sit in the waiting area. The waiting area was a large room, separated from the garage bay by a sturdy metal door. It had several chairs, many patched with duct tape, spread in a rough circle around a table of magazines. There was a pair of vending machines, one with soft drinks and the other with snack food. A short distance away lurked a counter, supporting an ancient cash register. Behind the counter stood a large bookshelf packed with books. A few other doors suggested offices, but nothing was actually clearly marked. Ed sat in a sagging vinyl chair and leafed through a copy of Psychology and Ceremony, a magazine devoted to both the scientific and the faithful. The glossy rag contained articles ranging from How Prayer Can Get You What You Want to There Is No God, Get a Life. Ed was currently skimming an article called Super Sex Magic. Wouldn't hurt to take a peek. Ed then caught a whiff of smoke. Following his nose, he found the scent was coming from the door that linked the garage to the office and cashier counter. He placed his ear against the cool steel of the door. He faintly heard chanting and music. Music? Was it going? A tremendous clattering erupted from behind the door. Ed leapt away. From within the garage, a muffled voice shouted, "There he goes, get the little bugger." More clattering, the sound of glass breaking, strange squealing noises, and still more clattering. Frightened, but curious, Ed threw open the door. He scanned the garage bay and saw the shorter fellow, Art, standing on the roof of the Beamer brandishing an intricately designed, double-edged knife. The taller one stood holding a metal canister the size of a garbage can. It shook violently, and the sides occasionally popped outward, as if something was banging around inside. "What in the name of all that's holy are you doing in here?" Ed shouted. "Stay back, sir," Art shouted over his shoulder. "One of 'em's still loose." "One of what?" Suddenly something streaked past Ed's foot. He didn't get a good look, but he could have sworn it was a tiny man. A tiny bluish man with a little Charlie Chaplin mustache. And pointed ears? Ed stepped quickly back into the waiting area. He strode over to the coffee machine. Beside the machine stood a cheerful handwritten sign that suggested that the customer enjoy complimentary coffee while you wait. Ed poured a cupful. He downed half the lukewarm sludge and grimaced. Reaching into his jacket pocket, he withdrew a small flask. Unscrewing the lid, he poured most of the contents into the coffee cup. In one great gulp, Ed shot the beverage and sat down in the nearest chair. Another cacophony erupted from within the garage. There was a great deal of squealing and clattering, then silence. Ed just sat, quietly thinking. He considered what he had just seen. "Just thought you'd seen," rational thought said. "Bugger off," irrational fear replied. "There's little blue weirdos in there. Not green, ha-ha, little blue weirdos." Before rational thought could come back with a snappy retort, the door to the garage opened, and Art walked in, wiping his hands on a rag. "All done, sir," he said. "Took a lot less time than we thought it would." "What exactly did you do?" Ed wasn't sure he wanted to know, but curiosity is often more powerful than rational thought and irrational fear combined. "Just a basic cleansing spell to get them out, and then a temporary suspension spell to contain them till disposal." Art said this as if he'd just replaced a windshield wiper blade and filled the tank. "Would you like to see them?" Ed shook his head violently. No, thanks a lot, but no." Gesturing over his shoulder toward the garage bay, Art continued, "Well, you'll want to run the car through a wash at your first opportunity. Make sure it's one of those mechanical ones you drive into. They can usually get the pentagram and the candle wax off the hood in one wash. May take a few dollars more if you do it manually." Ed blinked. "Pentagram? Candle wax?" Art walked past Ed without responding and scribbled on a small receipt pad. Sliding Ed's credit card through the scanner, Art waited for the receipt. After the paper was printed out, Art handed it to Ed, along with an itemized list of charges. Cleansing spell, $50. Suspension spell, $25. Labor, half hour, at $50 per hour, $25. Subtotal, $100. State tax, 5%, $5. Total, $105. Ed signed the credit slip and returned it to Art. "Thank you very much, Mr. Ford. I'd suggest staying the night at Bernita's bed and breakfast if I were you. It's awful late to be traveling anywhere around here." Ed snorted, having regained some composure. "I suppose you have a deal with this Bernita to delay your customers and send them her way." Now Ed saw how it worked. Scare the rubes with a few midgets and convince them to stay in town for their own safety. Again, Art looked shocked. "I just think it might be in your best interest if you stayed overnight and left after daybreak." Ed rolled his eyes and turned on his heel, walked to his car, which Bob had parked outside the garage bay. As Ed snatched the keys from Bob's hand, he thought he heard a faint scratching and banging from within the garage. Leaping into the BMW, Ed turned the key and was satisfied to hear the familiar sounds of the smoothly running engine. He lowered the window and yelled out to Bob. "There aren't any vampires along the way if I head in that direction, are there?" he said with a smirk, pointing down the road that crossed Crimson Valley Road. Bob followed the direction of Ed's finger and shook his head.
"No, sir. No vampires that way."
"Good!" Ed snapped, and powered his window up. With a spray of gravel, he peeled away in the direction he'd pointed. Bob shook his head and walked into the waiting area. Art was behind the counter flipping through the large leather-bound book. As he turned another parchment page, he asked, "Hey, Bob, do you remember where that spell for dissipation of malevolent earth elementals is? Is it this Dragonhide grimoire, or that kind of funny-smelling purple one?" Bob, who thought all the ancient grimoires smelled a bit funny, replied,
"The black one you've got there, halfway back, after the weather spells."
Art slapped his forehead with a palm as if he should have known that, and slid his finger along the chapter tabs he'd put in the book. When he found Elemental Spells, Weather, he flipped to the end and found the spell he was looking for. "Thanks, Bob." Art paused and looked up from the pages. "Mr. Ford didn't head back down Crimson Valley Road, did he?"
"No, he took Full Moon Highway,"
Bob said absently, pouring a cup of coffee and drinking it in one gulp. "You tell him about the werewolves?" Art was making notes on a piece of paper.
"Didn't ask about werewolves."
Art shrugged. "Well, he'll find out about them soon enough." Bob nodded, poured himself another cup, and repeated the single gulp swallow.
"Nice car."
Art nodded. Finishing his notes, he closed the book, which belched out a puff of dust. "Sure is. You best go look for it after the sun comes up. His next of kin will probably want it." Bob crushed his cup and tossed it into a wastebasket.
"Didn't want to stay at Benita's?"
"No, he was in a big hurry to get where he was going." Bob shook his head.
"They're always in a hurry. Hurry won't do any good if you aren't going to get there anyway."
"Sure enough," Art agreed as he stepped around the counter, heading toward the garage bay. "Well, shall we get rid of those little buggers?" Bob nodded again, and followed Art back into the garage bay.
This always felt like a small piece to a bigger story. Maybe set in some weird rural Lynchian madhouse, like Twin Peaks in Iowa. But I never got it to take. It may be worth revisiting, but for now, this fictional world consists of a garage and occult specialist shop at the crossroads between Crimson Valley Road and Full Moon Highway. Yeah, those names probably were a little too on the nose. That's something else I'll have to work on. Anyway, that's it for this show. I hope you come back next week for another episode of the Story by Podcast. As always, thanks for stopping by. I really appreciate it. Story by Podcast is a production of Fiddling Around Productions, LLC, and copyright 2018. Theme music is provided by Nalani Proctor, nalaniproctor.com, and used with permission. Other music by Kevin MacLeod, Incompetech.com, edited by Lewayne L. White, and licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0 license.